or Aries rising and or moon sign for April. Aries, Mars is currently moving through your third sign, Gemini, and Mercury has just moved into your sign. And so therefore, Mercury and Mars are exchanging these signs, the first and third. So this could lead to a lot of sort of activity, frenetic energy, expression, and traveling about. And on the one hand, this is a positive thing because, of course, so many planets in your sign, especially some welcome planets like Jupiter from the end of April, the Sun from mid-April. These are more positive transits for you in general. But because there's also an eclipse in your sign by April 20th, and then Mercury retrogrades from April 21st until May 15th, there's a lot going on. And so the pitfall of that would be there's too much going on. It's too frenetic. There's too much to think about. And the details are really sketchy, whatever it is you're starting out now. But again, the positive thing is that there is a sense of new beginnings. So this is always a time of year, Aries, to take full advantage of when the sun moves into your sign. It's your fifth lord, feeling inspired, feeling that sense of energy and vitality at this time of year. And Venus has just moved through your sign. By the 6th of April, it will move into your second sign, into Taurus, which is also a very positive transit. And then by the 22nd of April, we'll have the sun exalted in your sign in Aries. We'll have the moon exalted in Taurus and Venus in Taurus, Saturn in your 11th host sign of ambition and long-term plans. And together again with this Mars-Mercury exchange, which could work out for you if you really are patient. So many strengths, so many planets in their own sign or exalted, really powerful time. So especially that 22nd of April period, which is in India called Akshaya Tritiya, the undiminished lunar day, the third lunar day of this month, or of the new month after the new moon, which is just so happens to be a total solar eclipse. So that occurs on April 20th. So I'm just going to bring it forward so you can see that. So this is the new moon at 5 degrees of Sidereal Aries. If you have any planets, if your moon is around here, if your rising degree is around here, you'll be more impacted by it. But really having your rising sign or moon sign in Aries is going to be impacted in a big way by this eclipse. Now, what is a new moon? It's all about new beginnings, but a new beginning on steroid, in essence, because there's this sense of urgency more than anything else that people feel around the new moon and an eclipse. And that urgency builds and builds and builds until the following major lunation, the full moon opposite in Libra on May 5th, which is a partial lunar eclipse. So that's why I would say that although there are positive things happening in April, there are also too many things happening and too much of a sense of urgency. And you could easily, and this is one of the pitfalls I'm going to highlight here, which I'll bring it up here. And it actually doesn't happen exactly until the 27th of May, the exact conjunction. But from the 21st of May, Jupiter moves into your sign. So that means that Jupiter is combust because it's with the sun in your sign. And it's not visible. And then it's also conjunct the north node, the eclipse Rahu. And then you've got Mercury retrograde. So the details are really sketchy right now. And I would be cautious about advice that you're getting from any kind of legal field or any advice you get in general. Just be really mindful, really open. Check in with yourself first, because that's what combust planets are best for. Just look into your own self. And check with your own gut instinct. Is that right? That piece of advice that I've been given. So a lot going on, as you can see, and a lot to be patient about, because patience is really going to help you in the long run here, Aries. And even though, Aries, you're maybe not the most patient sign of the zodiac, we all have Aries. Wherever we have Aries, we're impatient. And this is feeling even more impatient because of Mercury retrograde and that exchange with Mars in Gemini. So try and be really patient in your communications as well, especially if you're sending off emails. Try not to do it like in haste and be really mindful of that. Now, fortunately, and it's not something I normally would talk about in this kind of way, but Saturn is fortunately looking on from Aquarius. So it aspects all these planets in your sign from the 11th sign. And so looking at your long-term goals is more important in that respect. And hopefully Saturn, by looking at all these planets, won't let you get overboard, won't, show you going overboard or get out of hand in any way, allow any of this to go crazy, because the potential is there for things to be really frenetic and sort of crazy for a while. You might feel so busy and there's so many new things happening and it's all very exciting, but it's just not clear. And, I guess you have to, in a way, accept that, you won't necessarily know straight away, and you might have to take some actions that you later regret or that you later backtrack on. And, having to accept that is a big part of this whole journey. So, like I said, pay attention to that 22nd, though, of April. You can see it here. The moon is exalted, sun is exalted, Venus in its own sign, your second sign. These are very positive indications here. And in terms of traditionally what this day is used for in India is buying gold, for example. So for you, Aries, it might be a good idea to kind of think about your financial situation and to do something auspicious, a new beginning around that. Maybe if it's even just an intention around doing something. Even though it's very close to the eclipse and all of that, it's not as auspicious. It's an important time to maybe make some intentions, at least around maybe starting something new in terms of your financial life and so on. And in terms of your life in general, I would say. So altogether, a mixed bag, April, but a lot of potential, a lot of really more positive transits going on, and especially that Jupiter in your sign for the next year. So it's not just for April, May. Once April, May is over and all the eclipses are over and all that retrograde Mercury, all the confusion that's brought about and all the delays, Jupiter will still be there and for a year ahead. So that's a lot more positive for you, Aries. So I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Taurus rising and or moon sign for April 2023, Taurus, Venus is about to move into your sign on April 6th. And this is absolutely a welcome return home. Venus moving into its home sign, into your sign, whether you're moon sign or rising sign. This is a lot more enjoyable, or at least the potential is there for enjoyment as Venus transits through your sign. So Venus will be there from April 6th until May 2nd. So really the whole of April, pretty much. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't other complications going on. And if I were just to leave it there, all of that sounds well and good. And certainly April is, in a sense, really the sweet spot in the year, despite other things that are going on. And especially when we get to April 22nd, right after the new moon and eclipse, although Mercury will be retrograde at that time and so many other complications, this is a really powerful time. It's an auspicious day despite the eclipse. And that is the sun is exalted, the moon is exalted in your sign, and then Venus is in your sign, and Saturn is in its own sign in your 10th whole sign. All of that sounds great, and it is great, but there are some complications. So mark your calendar, April 22nd, as a very auspicious day in the year, or as auspicious as we can get right now because of the eclipses and the everything else that's going on. So try and plan something for yourself, something maybe even just enjoyable, but certainly something more auspicious maybe that you want to build for your future, because this third lunar day on the 22nd of April, called Akshaya Tritiya, is all about something that you want to last. Akshaya means undiminished. So it's a very auspicious day to have both the sun and moon in a powerful position. Now, the complexity here, of course, is that I'll show you here first the eclipse. So although the sun is exalted and the moon is exalted by the 22nd, the sun, of course, is eclipsed by Rahu. It's a total solar eclipse. So, or what is called a hybrid eclipse, but basically the sun is almost totally eclipsed. And it's not the most auspicious time in that sense for new beginnings, but at the same time, it is a new moon. So it's about making new intentions, at least. It's just not the best time to actually start anything auspicious on the new moon day itself. So this is the 20th of April. This is even more so the case because of other complexities, such as Mercury the day after is about to go retrograde. So whatever has begun now is going to have a lot of complications involved, a lot of setbacks, a lot of delays, and the fine print will be very complicated. As well as that, Jupiter is about to move into Aries, your 12th sign, from your 11th. And so as it transitions from your 11th to 12th, there's some, things to negotiate there, some expense to deal with, some losses on some level. and an ending phase in many ways in your life for the next year, really, in relation to Jupiter. So whether it's about earning capabilities, whether it's about it's very much financial for you, Jupiter. So there could be some things to sacrifice, shall we say, in the next year with Jupiter in your 12th house. So as that's happening, Mercury then is going retrograde in your 12th house and exchanging with Mars in your second house. And so it's all about money. It's all about give and take. It's all about money in, money out. And when Mars and Mercury exchange like this between the 2nd and 12th, this could be quite complicated. So there could be some losses or hidden expenses that you hadn't accounted for example. And when Jupiter gets involved in this as well by the 21st, then it kind of could just expand on that. Just expenses could get out of hand. So it's something to be really mindful of. And expenses might have a lot to do with the home situation, your house, because the sun is your fourth lord and is the one being eclipsed. And Rahu, the North Node itself, your 10th house ruler. There's some work home situation perhaps going on here. The actions that you take now, though they lead to wisdom ultimately as Jupiter comes in behind it and brings clarity eventually, there isn't necessarily the clarity from the get-go. So to be really mindful about anything that you're doing in April, and whatever it is you're setting out to do, no matter how much there might be, some strengths here, there are so many complications that whatever you do, it's important to be mindful of the setbacks, the delays, to be really patient, with yourself and your financial situation, your family dynamics as well, dealing with anyone, and also with friends and just your goals in life in general. I would say just be really mindful and patient around these issues. The new moon itself, like I said, is on the 20th. So it's a new moon at 5 degrees, a total solar eclipse, 5 degrees of Aries in your 12th sign. And so there might be some new beginning here, but there is also a sacrifice to be able to start again. And that's what the 12th house represents. So in order to start again, you really could, just do with taking some time out on the day itself, on the solar eclipse, and just slow down and pay attention and make some intentions. And as the moon then begins to wax into the full moon a couple of weeks later on May 5th, there could be some resolution here by May 5th around the full moon partial lunar eclipse in Libra. So whatever resolution that you achieve there, it might not feel like that from the get-go. And there might be a sense at the same time of a lot of urgency to make something happen or to finish something or to do something. And so again, be patient with it because it's not necessarily going to work itself out very quickly. So all of that, though, with all of that happening, don't forget that 22nd of April, as the moon is exalted, sun's exalted, and Venus is in your sign, to really make the most of this period and to do something auspicious and to start something new. Again, even if it's just like setting an intention on the 22nd of April. So I hope that's been of help, Taurus. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Gemini rising and or moon sign for April 2023, Gemini, Mercury, your ruler, is in Aries and will be in Aries for a long time. So it moves in on March 31st and will be there until June 7th. So that's because it's going to go retrograde from April 21st to May 15th. And it's not just going retrograde in your 11th sign, Aries, but it's exchanging with Mars in your first sign, Gemini. So there's a powerful dynamic going on here for you right now, Gemini, and you can really make it work for you. And it's a more positive expression of this exchange more than most signs. So Gemini, you could really, focus on your ambitions, focus on your network, your friend circles, your groups that you associate with of any kind, but really focus on being very clear and not being too brutish about it either, because Mars in your first sign in Gemini, could be too direct, perhaps for some people's taste. And yet you just need to feel the energy of Mars and do something with it. Now, oftentimes the problem with Mars and Gemini in the first house, whether it's your rising sign or moon sign, is this angst, this energy that hasn't got a healthy outlet, because Mars doesn't like to talk, it just likes to do something. So if you're not doing something and you just funnel that energy through your vocal expression, then that's not necessarily going to work out well. But if you collaboration with other people and in unison, like for example, a really good example of this would be like an exercise group or going to a class to work out. This would be a good expression of this Mars and Gemini exchanging the 1st and the 11th. That's when you can really feel empowered within a group dynamic. But if you're just sitting around debating something, this would not be the best expression for this Mars and Gemini and the Mercury in Aries, because on top of all of that, Mercury is going to go retrograde, remember? So from the 21st of April to the 15th of May, leaving it in Aries all that time, exchanging with Mars, but retrograde and really complicating matters. And that's the day after a total solar eclipse in your 11th sign. And then Jupiter moves in the day after on the 21st, just as Mercury stations. So I'm going to show you this here on the 20th. First of all, you have the new moon total solar eclipse in your 11th house. This is definitely showing some alterations that have to happen, some changes that need to be made in your social life, in your career objectives as well, in your long-term objectives, in any kind of dealings with people, and in just in your goals in general and in your earnings. So all of these things are showing that there's some changes here that need to be made. And with Mercury going retrograde the day after for the next few weeks, there's a lot of reassessment and review of the finer details. So you might not be clear about the details initially. So that's why it's important, like I said, to be really mindful of this if you're dealing with groups and friends. So it's at 5 degrees of Aries, this solar eclipse. It's eclipsed by the North Node Rahu, and then Jupiter the day after moves in. So Jupiter gets involved, your 10th lord. So work and relationships are going to be pulled into this dynamic. So a lot going on in your 11th house of groups and friends and associations and goals and gains, and, you know, quite complex this whole period, I would say. But at the same time, there are some many positive things. And you can see here on the 22nd of April, it's probably one of the more positive days of the year, despite it being within the eclipses and despite there being a lot of change happening and a lot of volatility and a lot of urgency. A lot of the times people feel this urgency to do something, to make a decision during the eclipses, even though that's probably not the best time to actually make a decision. However, there's this sweet spot for sure in the month, despite the eclipse, and that is the sun is exalted on the 22nd, the moon's exalted, Venus is in its own sign in Taurus in your 12th sign, Saturn in its own sign. And so, and even then with Mars and Mercury exchanging signs, it's as if you put Mars in Aries and Mercury in your sign Gemini. So there's a lot of strengths going on here despite the volatility and the shakeup that's happening. So you should, Gemini, feel it really powerfully. And this could be a very positive thing for you. So use the 22nd of April, put it in your calendar, mark it in your diary, 22nd of April as a time to at least make an intention to start something new in your life, some new auspicious activity. Now, it might not be, like I said, the most auspicious time overall because of the eclipse. And, you know, in Indian astrology, they advise against doing anything new, auspicious new activity anyway around the eclipse itself. But at the same time, I mean, beggars can't be choosers in this day and age, and we have to look for the auspicious spots, the sweet spots throughout the year. And so this is definitely one of them. So a lot to give thanks for, a lot to be grateful for, despite the changes. Venus itself, you know, when you think about Venus in the 12th house, it's one of the only planets that likes it there, because it's all about surrendering. It's all about letting go and enjoying, just going with the flow, you know, and enjoying the simple pleasures of life as well. And enjoying the engagement and the interaction that you can have, and many interactions, many social engagements that you could have at this time. And that's actually maybe the downfall of all these planets combined together and all the complexity that's going on here. It's like if you overdo it, then it could be a problem. But if you just give yourself enough time to have some social interaction and not overdo it and not be overstimulated, this could be a very enjoyable time for you, Gemini. So I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time, for Cancer rising and or moon sign for April 2023, Cancer, there is a solar eclipse in your 10th host sign, Aries, by April 20th. And then 2 weeks later, a partial lunar eclipse in your 4th host sign on May 5th. So between this window, this eclipse window, as it's called, this eclipse window could feel quite urgent and quite immediate because it's happening in your 4th and 10th house. So this is very much about work and home life. And there might be, or even if you're not out at working, there could be a sense of having to do something or feeling the urgency to do something. And the advice generally for eclipses is that despite the urgency, there's no rush. You know, even though that's not how you're going to feel, you might feel like you really do need to take a decision or do something. But the issue here is that there's so much going on in your 10th house that you might get confused around what you should be doing and how to do it. Because not only is there an eclipse, but Mercury is retrograde and Jupiter is going to conjoin the sun, so combust, invisible Jupiter, and then also conjoin Rahu, the North Node, the eclipse. And so there's not a lot of clarity around the work situation right now, quite likely. And so whatever decisions that you do take, make sure that you get a second opinion. Make sure that you check in with yourself as to the actions that you should take. Check in with your gut instinct if that is right for you. Don't just assume who's ever telling you what to do, they know what they're talking about. Because when you add all of this in combination with a Mercury retrograde in your 10th house from April 21st until May 15th, this together with the eclipses shows a lot of flux, a lot of change, and a lot of reassessment and review. And no one's clear about it, no matter who might seem like they are. And so it's important to really take your time with this and be patient. And on top of that, because Mercury in Aries is exchanging with Mars now in Gemini in your 12th sign, this could be like a need to finish some project out or finish some work dynamic or situation that's going on, or finish some work relationship, or maybe a relationship with your boss or something like that, or they may want to finish with you in some way, or or something is ending, and maybe that's a good thing because then you maybe can move on up or do something else or do it some other way. But when you have the 10th and 12th house exchange going on, there could be some sacrifice that has to be made here for your work, or maybe even you sacrificing some work for some reason. Even though there are so many planets gathering in your 10th house, it's again that exchange between Mercury in your 10th and Mars in your 12th that shows this kind of push-pull in a way that you have to be really mindful of. So let me show you first the eclipse on the 20th. So it's at 5 degrees of Aries, your 10th whole sign. This is very much about new beginnings, shaky new beginnings in your work life. And in anything you're doing, actually, any plans that you have and your sense of direction in life might be a bit unclear in the beginning, but at the same time, it's an important time to set some intentions despite the lack of clarity. That's also a lot to do with the fact that Jupiter is moving signs here. And then as it does, it still combusts. You can't see Jupiter. It's moved into your 10th sign from April 21st as Mercury retrogrades now. And so the planets, Jupiter and Mercury, when they're not very clear about things, it's hard to make a decision. So be really mindful of that. Now, overall, though, Jupiter is going to stay in Aries for a year until next April 2024. So April, May is just a kind of hiccup. It's once this all clears and all the confusion around this clears, the eclipses and the Mercury retrogrades and all of that, Jupiter will still be there and bring more clarity into what you're doing and what you want to do and what's more meaningful for you to do, actually, what's more meaningful work for you. That's Jupiter as the 9th Lord in your 10th house. It's a really important combination when you have the 9th Lord in the 10th house for you to do something purposeful and meaningful for you. Now, whether that also involves travel, that's another potential, the 9th Lord in your 10th house. So maybe traveling for work, all of those things are quite potential. Study to improve your work, another possibility. But whatever it is, it's something more expansive anyway, overall, with Jupiter now in your 10th house for the next year. So that's more positive. Again, it's just in this whole April-May period and into the end of May, which I'll talk about more next month, you have this Jupiter-Rahu conjunction, which is just not being clear and other people not being clear and then giving you the wrong advice. And if you haven't spent the time to really check in with yourself and your own gut instincts, then you might be led astray. Now, from another perspective, a bigger perspective, there's no mistakes and everything is as it's meant to be. So whatever you do at this time, whatever action you do take, even if you're not clear about the details, it is all meant to be in the grander scheme of things. So that is the month of April. One thing I do want to say is that Saturn with its aspect onto Aries from the 8th house, is not really going to allow you to get too out of hand with any of this and go crazy and do whatever you want to do. And, you know, although all of this suggests that there's a lot going on in your work, there's a Saturn in position here, and that could be a good thing. So it's some sort of other entity, some other person, maybe even your partner, your relationship, some relationship of some kind, whether it's business or otherwise, maybe just kind of putting the brakes on, or maybe you getting you to think about your responsibilities, and no matter what you want to do yourself personally. So that could be a good thing, because otherwise it might have gone too haywire. So Cancer, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Leo rising and or moon sign for April 2023. So Leo, the sun, your ruler, is about to move into your 9th house sign from the 8th. And so although this is most definitely a more positive shift, because every year by mid-April, the sun moves into Sidereal Aries, April 13th, 14th, until mid-May. And that's a very positive thing, to have your ruler exalted in the 9th house sign. All that sounds really fantastic, and it is in many ways, except for the fact that it's a eclipse. There's an eclipse on April 20th, and it's a total solar eclipse. There is also Mercury retrograde the day after, as Jupiter also transitions from the 8th to your 9th sign. So what I would say about that is that April is a transitionary period, and that is a positive thing ultimately for you, Leo, because having planets move from your 8th into your 9th, and especially that Jupiter more than anything, actually, because the sun is just 1 month long, whereas Jupiter is a whole year in your 9th sign from the end of April. And once all of these things get worked out, all the kinks, all the Mercury retrogrades and the eclipse and all of that uncertainty, all of that gets ironed out, and the clouds part, you know, the sun returns, and that inner awareness and that inner knowing and inspiration and intuition of Jupiter can shine through more and more in the coming year. So that's a lot more positive for you, Leo. It means that with Jupiter in your 9th house, it also aspects your 1st house and your 5th house. So it creates a lot more potential for more positive experiences. So travel, for example, study, personal growth, inner growth, outer growth, more children if you want them, better relationships with your children if you have them. If you don't have them and you don't want them, there could be some creative self-expression that you can facilitate at this time. There are so many positive expressions of Jupiter in the 9th house. But again, like I said, you have to kind of get over this hump here, which is the April period. So I'm going to show you this first as the eclipse on the 20th. So the sun is in Aries from 14th or so, and the sun then is eclipsed on the 20th at 5 degrees of Aries. So it's a total solar eclipse. It's eclipsed by Rahu. Rahu is there until the end of October, and that is maybe putting a bit of a dampener on the whole Jupiter vibe, for the first few months of Jupiter in Aries, at least. And I'll show you this the day after. You see here that Jupiter moves into Aries. So that is one kind of complexity here, one thing to be mindful of, because Jupiter in the 9th, like I said, it's really positive, but conversely, Rahu in the 9th is probably the least positive place to put Rahu. And so it kind of overshadows the effects of Jupiter. Having said that, I'm going to be really kind of twist this again and maybe be Pollyanna-ish about it. But basically, when Jupiter and Rahu are together, Jupiter in a way props up Rahu. And so you can have a really nice, interesting Rahu experience. And that's why I'm saying, if you were to travel, for example, or if you're to study something of foreign culture, or if you just expand your awareness in some way, on some unusual way that you're not normally used to, this could be a very positive experience. If, on the other hand, especially the first few months, like I said, until Rahu is moved out of here by the end of October, you just want to have your typical sort of very comforting sort of experience with Jupiter in the 9th house, Rahu is unlikely to let that be the usual kind of experience. You have to have some sort of different kind of experience with Rahu always. So just being mindful of that, I would say. The other thing I'd be really mindful of overall throughout this whole period for the next few months, especially, but especially leading into the end of May, is getting any advice. So 9th house is about advice in general. Jupiter is about advice also. And when they come together, Rahu and Jupiter, you might be getting the wrong advice. Now, it might not be intentional, somebody might not be intentionally deceiving you, but they just might not know themselves. So that's why it's important to really check in with your own self, your own inner intuition, your own gut, and really check with that before you seek any advice. And if you were to seek any advice at all, it's probably not a good idea to seek advice at this time. April, May, I'm referring to more so. And also at this time on the 21st, just after the eclipse, we have Mercury station retrograde for the next few weeks until May 15th in your 9th house. So if you were to travel or plan to travel, be really open-minded about the kind of snags that you can meet along the way, because Mercury retrograde in the 9th house is certainly that. It's the potential for delays while traveling. It's the potential for misunderstandings while studies, and all of that can be really, for students, that could be really challenging in that respect. Now, it would be a really good time for review and coming up to exams or something like that. It'd be really good for reviewing and reassessing everything. The other complication here is that Mercury in Aries is exchanging with Mars in the 11th. But for you and for just a few of the signs, you're one of the more fortunate signs, Leo. This can be a very positive thing. So you have the 9th and 10th house exchange between Mars and Mercury. Mars is in Gemini in your 11th house sign. And so this could be a really good experience. Like I said, for in terms of traveling, if you were to travel and you're open to, some sort of trips that you hadn't planned for example, you could really gain from them. For example, that's one example. But whatever it is that you feel that is expanding right now and you feel some hope and positivity, keep an open mind about it is what I would say, because there could be unexpected rewards and gains coming your way. So it's one of the more positive exchanges for all the signs, Leo. So really take heart from that and really make the most of this Jupiter transit. And again, be mindful of this more immediate transit of the eclipse sun, the Mercury retrograde, and slow down and pay attention to the details and try not to get too impatient, especially if you're traveling or planning anything at this time. Saturn on the other side of the zodiac, across from your rising sign or moon sign, is obviously showing that there's a need to focus on relationships. And in a way, it's potentially a relationship that is holding things back in a way. And that could be a good thing because Saturn is aspecting all the planets, including your sun here in Aries. So although it might sound like a downer that, your partner or somebody else is kind of restricting you or imposing something on you, but in fact, it actually could be a good container for you, that if you didn't have that person containing the situation, this might be too much. There's like a lot going on in Aries, and that could be you going overboard and doing too much and not considering the consequences and not thinking about the finer details. So have your partner there as a sort of backup, or somebody else, whether it's a business partner or your romantic partner, or whatever it might be, any other person, a work colleague even, because Saturn is your sixth lord as well. So it could be somebody else, whoever it is, giving you that sense of, no, you need to sort of, not do that. Or at least you need to maybe think twice about that and slow down and consider the consequences of that. And that could be in a way frustrating for you as well, but because all of these other transits are so expansive. But again, take your time with it, because they are there to give you a sort of like, a container for whatever it is you want to do. The other thing is that Venus is in its own sign, Taurus, in your 10th house sign. So work related things could be really positive at this time as well. And you notice here that I have the April 22nd up. This is when the sun and the moon, the two luminaries, are both exalted. And also Venus is in its own sign, 10th sign, Saturn in its own sign, 7th sign, even Mars and Mercury with the exchange. It's as if they were in their own signs, Mars in Aries and Mercury in the 11th. There's so many positive expressions here that are potential. It's just, you have to be mindful of the eclipse, and that even though this 22nd of April, in India, they call it Akshaya Tritiya, the undiminished lunar day, third lunar day, is seen as the most auspicious day in many regards. This year, because of the eclipse, obviously it's not as auspicious. And generally in India, they would not recommend that you start any new auspicious activities during the eclipses. However, I mean, you do have to take what you can get, right? So this April 22nd, put it in your diary, in your calendar, mark it out as at least a day to make some intention for starting something new, whether it's travel plans, study, whatever, work issues, whatever it is. anything at all that feels auspicious and you want to start and you want that thing to last, 22nd of April will be a good time to do that. Take advantage of all of these more positive transits. Okay, Leo, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Virgo rising and or moon sign for April 2023, Virgo, your ruler Mercury is in your 8th house sign in Aries, and it will be there for quite some time from the 31st of March until June 7th. So that's a longer than usual transit for Mercury through one sign. And that's because it's going to slow down in April and then station retrograde on April 21st, and then move backwards from our perspective until May 15th, and then not move forward again and out of the sign until June 7th. So Aries is your 8th house sign, Virgo, and this adds some complexity for sure to an already complex situation in many ways, because we have not only Mercury retrograde, but an eclipse in your 8th sign, and Jupiter, which is about to move into your 8th sign on the day that Mercury retrogrades on April 21st. So I'll show you that here. This is the 21st. And with all of this attention on your 8th sign, which is all about fundamentally about change and unexpected change most often, because it's one of the hidden houses, quote unquote, where, you know, you might not be consciously making any of this happen, but at the same time, there's a need here to make some big changes, some fundamental changes in your life and in your relationships as well, especially because Jupiter, your 7th lord, is moving into this dynamic, is getting involved in all of this. Jupiter is combust, hidden behind the rays of the sun. It's conjoining the north node, Rahu. Rahu has, you know, an eclipse of the sun, a total solar eclipse of the sun in your 8th sign. And Mercury, your ruler, is retrograde along with Uranus, very closely conjunct Uranus as it begins its retrograde. So a lot of complexity, a lot of things for you to work out with other people, with your partner in particular, or any partner, whether it's in a business or romantic, personal relationships. A lot of joint finances and joint resources and values to think about. A lot will get resolved in this time as well, but it's going to start off with the new moon, and the new moon is on the 20th of April. The new moon is at 5 degrees of Aries. This is, like I said, a total solar eclipse the day before Mercury stations retrograde. So whatever you are starting now and in conjunction with someone else, like if you're having to negotiate with someone else or some financial situation or some intimate situation or some really some situation that has in a way potential for changing your life for the better, but initially it might feel like that you don't want to make those changes, that you can't see the outcomes initially, at any rate. But it would all come clear in the end, of course. And to be really patient with yourself and other people at this time, I would say, Virgo, because there are some things to work out, some things to negotiate. So after this new moon, even though a new moon and an eclipse is very much an important time for instigating something new, especially in Aries, you know, it's not necessarily the best time to actually start something. You know, it's a good day to intend something. But thinking about the eclipse is that there's usually a sense of urgency to do something, to make a decision. And decisions are not going to be coming clear right now because Mercury is retrograde, first of all, but then Jupiter is moving in and getting eclipsed itself in a way and is combust. So there's no clarity at all around decision making necessarily here. The thing to do here is not to be looking outside yourself for confirmation for something or clarity or advice from anyone, but to actually check in with yourself and your own gut instinct here. So that's one of the expressions of a combust planet like Jupiter. Even with your partner, you know, there's a need here to really check in and really go with your gut. And to, at the same time, recognize when your gut can sometimes not be your gut. Sometimes people think that's an intuitive nudge I have for that, but really it's actually misplaced, some advice coming from somewhere that they're checking in with. This is the problem with Rahu and Jupiter when they come together. Getting bad advice, just sensing, you know, something's off, you know, you don't really know what to do. You're not clear about it. So that's why I would say a lot of patience is needed at this time, Virgo, in any kind of dynamics that are just uncertain, unclear, out of your control in many ways as well, which what makes it kind of very frustrating. But it's important not to get too frustrated with this, because If you're to be still at this time around the new moon and in the subsequent couple of weeks until the full moon in Libra, where things can begin to get resolved then on May 5th, if you were to just quieten down and tune into what's happening, the important changes that have to happen right now, that'll be a better use of your time than trying to scramble around, trying to make decisions about things and get things done. It's generally not a good time to make decisions, eclipses, for sure. On top of that, Mercury, your ruler in Aries, is exchanging with Mars, which is now in your 10th house sign, Gemini. So there's some dynamic going on with whatever you're doing anyway, and especially related to work environments and things like that, and with your boss. And so it's really precarious. It's really tricky. Try and be really patient with what's happening right now. Try not to make too many decisions that you at least don't have to make. I mean, if there are things that you have to do, of course, you need to do them. But if it's not necessary right now, I would definitely encourage putting it off right now around this eclipse. And again, because then Mercury goes retrograde and continues to exchange with Mars. So the 8th and 10th house exchange can show just unexpected events, you know, in your work situation. Now, you could think of that as more positive, unexpected developments. So that could be a one thing to think about. But again, just don't get too attached to anything that's happening now because it's all in flux. Now, having said all of that, there is here on the 22nd of April a more auspicious day in the calendar. In the Vedic calendar, it's called Akshaya Tritiya. Akshaya means undiminished. Tritiya is the third lunar day. This third lunar day after the new moon and the eclipse would ordinarily be very, very auspicious. And it is auspicious because the sun is exalted, the moon is exalted. In this case, Venus is also in its own sign, Saturn in its own sign. The Mars even and the Mercury exchanging signs, as if Mercury were in Gemini, its own sign, and Mars in Aries, its own sign. So there's a lot of positives here. But the thing is that the sun is conjoined Rahu. It's eclipsed. And Jupiter itself is on the edge of the sign. So there isn't as much auspiciousness as we would normally see for this Akshaya Tritiya, the undiminished day, sun and moon exalted. But at the same time, it is more auspicious. So you know, it might not be the best time of the year in many ways, but in another way, I think it could be a very spiritual time, a time to really take your time and set some intentions, I would say, Virgo. And to use whatever positivity that is here, because there is most definitely some positivity here, including the Venus moving through your 9th whole sign from April 6th until the beginning of May. So most of April, you have Venus in your 9th sign Taurus, which can be very enjoyable as well. So make the most of these sweet spots when you can grab them. Okay, Virgo, I hope that's a bit of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Libra rising and or moon sign for April 2023, Libra Venus is in your 7th sign just for the first few days until April 6th, and then it moves into your 8th sign, into Taurus, into a strong position in its own sign, Taurus. Now, there's a lot going on in your 7th sign as this is happening, and so having your ruler out of the way, in a way, is probably a positive thing. And yet still Venus in Taurus, if I show you that here, is still influenced strongly by Rahu in the 7th house. So Libra, you are and have been for many months already going through a lot of changes with your relationship, changes in your relationship, and quite likely changes for your partner. If you don't have a partner, of course, this will, you know, focus you on that area anyway and get you thinking about that a lot. And you're going to be thinking about it a lot either way, whether you're with someone or not, whether you're with anyone or not during this whole period for the next few weeks, you are going to be focusing a lot on other people. So that's something to be mindful of, not to lose yourself in that, because that is the tendency with Ketu in your rising sign and Rahu in your 7th sign. Now together with the sun moving in by mid-April and then Jupiter moving in by the end of the month, at which time we'll have an eclipse in your 7th sign, and then Mercury station retrograde and move backwards until the middle of May. So a lot of activity in your relationship space, Libra, a lot to focus on. So let's first of all look at the eclipse. It happens, this is the new moon in Aries on April 20th. It's a total lunar eclipse, or sorry, a total solar eclipse, or what is called a hybrid eclipse. And it's at 5 degrees of Aries. It's with Rahu, so it's a north node eclipse. Mercury the day after this will retrograde. Jupiter the day after also will move into your 7th sign. Now, although that there are some very positives going on here because Sun is exalted in your 7th sign, Jupiter is moving into your 7th sign, which is a better placement for Jupiter than the 6th sign. All of that's all very positive, but again, it's all mixed up with an eclipse. There's something overshadowing something. There's something unforeseen and some changes that are happening right now in your relationship or for your partner. And combined with a Mercury retrograde, there could be a lot of confusion around the details here and not being communicative or not being able to be clear about what is going on, either they to you or you to them. So there's a lot of things that you have to consider here, despite the many strengths that are going on right now. And of course, any new moon and solar eclipse in any area of the chart is a time to really be quiet, be still, set some intentions, not necessarily take action, even though it's Aries, it's a new moon in Aries. And you might think that's all about taking action. In fact, a new moon and especially an eclipse, the sun is totally eclipsed. It's not the most auspicious time to start anything new. So that's one thing to say. Definitely a good time to think about what you want to start, though. And a couple of days later, even maybe then start something. Now, a couple of days later on April 22nd, I would mark this in your diary, in your calendar. There is the sun exalted, the moon exalted, Venus, your ruler, in its own sign, Taurus, Saturn in its own sign, Aquarius. A lot of positives here going on for sure. And if there were any sort of sweet spot in this whole period, it would be this. So April 22nd would be a great time to actually start something new. However, again, remember that this is within the eclipse now. So we've just had the new moon and eclipse on April 20th, and that leads to a partial lunar eclipse in your sign by May 5th. So that whole 2-week period between April 20th and May 5th is, as every eclipse period is, uncertain. There are changes happening and they might not be obvious. And also there might be a sense of urgency on top of that. And the urgency, especially with Aries, is this need or this feeling that you need to do something perhaps, or your partner has an urgency about them that they need to do something, but it's not necessarily the best time to actually do anything, is what I'm saying. Again, it's an important time to look at the changes that are happening in your relationship for you, Libra. Now, there's another really interesting and quite a complicated and yet I think ultimately beneficial transit going on for you. And that is with Mercury in Aries and now retrograde, Mars is in Gemini. So they're exchanging signs, Aries and Gemini. So it's as if you can put Mars in the 7th sign, Aries, and Mercury in the 9th sign, which can be very positive with Mercury, especially in the 9th. But what it's doing is mixing up 7th and 9th relationships and travel, relationships and good fortune, good luck. And that is one of the more positive exchanges for any of the signs. So for you, Libra, certainly make the most of this with Mars and Mercury exchanging signs. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it can lead to many great things. So if you negotiate with your partner around finances and travel and things like that, or maybe they're traveling and all of that could lead to very many positive experiences. Again, despite all the other things that are going on, including and not least the Mercury retrograde. Because if you are to travel or if you are dealing with anyone at any stage, and especially your partner, be mindful that Mercury retrograde can lead to a lot of miscommunication and missteps. So if you're traveling, especially, just be really mindful of that, you might miss your connections. You might have some time on your hands you didn't account for. They're the typical expressions of a Mercury retrograde. So Libra, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Scorpio rising and or moon sign for April 2023, Scorpio, your ruler Mars is in Gemini in your 8th house sign, and it will continue here until mid-May. But while it does, it is exchanging with Mercury, which is now in your 6th sign in Aries. So Aries and Gemini, their rulers, Mercury and Mars, are exchanging signs. This can be a double negative for you because what they're doing is exchanging two challenging houses, areas of life, 6th and 8th. But what it actually can mean is that you are presented with a challenge, but then you overcome the challenge and that actually you come out on top. And for example, if you're having to deal with some problem or other or some obstacle, that the obstacle itself is actually what's going to give you the motivation to do what you know you need to do. So that's really what it means to have the 6th and 8th lords exchanging like this. So it could be a very powerful time for you, Scorpio. But again, it doesn't mean that you can just sit back and do nothing. It requires some effort on your part to do something to overcome some challenge. Now, added to that, Mercury will retrograde from the end of April. So there are some challenges there in terms of delays and possibly missteps and miscommunications and misinterpretations that you need to be mindful of. So if you are dealing with any kind of problematic situation right now in any kind of way, make sure that you're clear as possible, and make sure that you're open-minded about you not being understood 100% clearly, because no matter how clear you might be about it, the other person might not take you up correctly. So definitely some things to negotiate here. If you're dealing with any kind of employee issues, like if you're an employer, or coworker issues, or any kind of people who you're seeing as competition or as an enemy in some way, all the sixth sign represents really is your own inner demons that you're grappling with. And so this is a time to really tune into that and focus on what you can improve in yourself. There is a lot of emphasis on the 6th sign and even more to come. So if I show you this by mid-month, we have Sun move in mid-month, as it always does in April, and then Jupiter will move in the day after the eclipse. So all of these planets are joining up in your 7th or in your 6th sign, and this is a lot of attention on problems potentially. So again, although again it's a double negative, so that you can overcome the problems, and actually if you didn't have the issue, you wouldn't have dealt with it. So that's a positive. But it's just you don't want to overly focus on problems all the time either, because that certainly could be the indication here. Rahu is here, Sun and Moon for the new moon and eclipse on the 20th. I'll talk about that now. Mercury is stationed retrograde on the 21st. Jupiter is moving in for the next year from the 21st, from April this year until April 2024. A lot of emphasis on your 6th house. How does your life work day to day? How are you working things out? That's essentially what this is all about. So let me go back to the day before. On the 20th of April, we have a new moon and a total solar eclipse at 5 degrees of Aries in your 6th host sign. And again, that exchange between that and the 8th is very relevant. This is showing some shakeups that are needed here, some changes that you have to make in your daily routines and your health. And so it could bring up some issue in your health, of course, for you to actually overcome that problem. Because again, remember I said that this is the time that you can do that. But it might actually have to come up now, because an eclipse can generally show some issues, can bring something to light, or you might just have this sense of something, and even if it were not an obvious outward thing, that you just know that you need to change this habit or lifestyle in some way. So that's the new moon in Aries. It's usually, the new moon is not a good time to take any action. It's a great time for setting intentions and starting anew in that way. But a new moon and solar eclipse is most certainly not a good time, an auspicious time to actually start something new. But what you could do is a couple of days later is use this day, which is the 22nd of April, which is called Akshaya Tritiya, the undiminished third lunar day of this month. That is when the sun and the moon both are exalted. Venus also is in its own sign at this time, Saturn in its own sign, and as if Mars were in its own sign with the exchange in Aries, and Mercury in its own sign in Gemini. So there's a lot of powerful transits on the one hand, and again, a powerful time to start something new on the 22nd of April. However, again, it's within the eclipse. The eclipse just happened a couple of days prior to this on the 20th, and the next eclipse, a lunar eclipse on May 5th, occurs in Libra opposite, where some resolution can be had. So in that way, it's not the most auspicious time for new beginnings. But again, at the same time, we have to pick and choose. Each month has at least some sweet spot that we can take full advantage of. So that's one I would take advantage of in April for sure. And the fact is, well, that Venus is in your 7th sign from April 6th for really the most of the month, that you're then enjoying the 7th house Venus, some enjoyment with your partner, for example, because if it were all work and no play, all 6th house and no 5th house or 7th house or any of those kinds of nice things, then life would be a bit too much of a a hard slog, right? So, but it doesn't mean that you should ignore what needs your attention. And this sixth house needs a lot of attention in the next year, even because of Jupiter's transit here. And I'll talk more about Jupiter and Rahu coming together in May. But again, once all of this is cleared up and the retrograde Mercury has finished out by the middle of May, and after the eclipses and all of that, Jupiter is settling into the sixth house for you. And it's a time to really connect with your day-to-day life, your routines and your habits that, it's all about finding meaning in those kinds of things. So, Scorpio, I hope that has been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Sagittarius rising and or moon sign for April 2023, Sagittarius, your ruler Jupiter, is about to finish up its long transit in Pisces in your fourth house. And although it's moving out of its own sign Pisces, you might breathe a sigh of relief in many ways because it's now moving out of this situation being hemmed in between Saturn and Rahu in Pisces. And so, as hopeful as Jupiter in Pisces has been on the one hand, on the other hand, it didn't really get anywhere because of this hemming in more recently. Now, it does mean that, and I'll show you this a couple of weeks later, we have Jupiter move into your fifth sign, your whole sign, Aries. Now, this means that it comes into an aspect from Saturn. Now, that's not a bad thing in many ways as well, because it won't let you get out of hand, because otherwise these things could have got out of hand very easily. And what are these things? Fifth sign. So Sun moves into your fifth sign by mid-April. By the end of April, 21st of April, Jupiter moves in the day after the total solar eclipse in your fifth sign. And then Mercury on the same day, 21st of April, will retrograde. So there is a lot of emphasis on your fifth sign, Aries. While Mars, which rules Aries, is exchanging with Mercury. So Mars is in Mercury sign, the seventh sign, and Mercury in your fifth sign, exchanging the fifth and seventh. So there's so much emphasis on relationships right now, on creativity and self-expression and speculation and future planning. So if you have any kind of plans on the back burner, it's likely that those plans will really kick in a strong way in April. Now, the thing about that is, and the reason why I'm saying Saturn's aspect here is a good thing, is that it won't let you get out of hand, because otherwise you would just be taking decisions now and actions that you may later regret. Because when you have Rahu in the fifth house, eclipsing the sun on the 20th of April, first of all, that's not the most auspicious time to start anything new, despite what it might suggest, because it's a new moon in Aries, and it seems like, oh, this is a great time to begin again. Yes, the sun is exalted and all of that, but it's not the most auspicious new beginning because it's an eclipse. If you were to start something new, I would do it 2 days later on the 22nd of April, when the sun and the moon are both exalted. The moon is now in Taurus, where Venus has moved in, is also from April 6th. And so there's a lot of strengths in this chart with the sun and moon exalted, Venus in its own sign, Saturn in its own sign, as if Mars were in its own sign, Aries, and Mercury in Gemini because of the exchange. Lots of strengths going on here. So that would be a good time, I think, to start something new. But again, considering that it's an eclipse, just be mindful of being open-minded about unexpected twists and turns that this could bring about. And on top of that, Mercury's retrograde. So that whatever you do start is not very clear at all from the outset, and the finer details are not coming clear for a while, until June, in fact, when Mercury makes it out of this place. But yet still, this is an important time for you to set some plans in motion to plan ahead something that you would love to do, because that's what the fifth house is essentially about. Now, again, if you have children, it's very much related to them and their lives and your interactions with them, but all kinds of relationships, a lover and relationships in general. Of course, fifth and seventh houses are very much connected here. Fifth house is very much the beginnings of a relationship, like the romantic beginnings of a relationship, whereas seventh house is more about formalizing a relationship, like getting serious, getting committed in a relationship, for example. So obviously there are lots of more pleasant things here. For you, more than most signs, Sagittarius, this could be a very pleasurable, very enjoyable transit period in April. But again, just be mindful of the kind of many twists and turns and the things to negotiate with other people. And just be mindful of that, because it could really lead to kind of very much impulsive action that you might actually later regret. And also getting advice that you might actually later regret acting upon. Because when you have Jupiter and Rahu together in your fifth sign with Mercury retrograde, that's like getting advice that's just poor advice, basically. I'll talk more about that in May as well, because Jupiter and Rahu will come together by exact degree. So yeah, fifth house, advice around your children, advice around any kind of speculative, any kind of endeavor like that, like markets and things like that, planning anything actually. Just keep an open mind, I would say, and really check in with your own sense, your own intuition, your own gut on whatever it is that you're deciding upon. Because the fifth house is very much about making decisions about your future and or your children's future. So really take your time with it, I would say, in April into May. Mercury will station direct by the middle of May, and after the eclipses are cleared, then Jupiter can settle into the fifth house, which is, by the way, one of the more positive transits overall, because Jupiter in the fifth house aspects your sign, aspects your ninth sign. It's definitely a lot more inspired, more travel, more study potential there, more good luck and fortune in general, a sense of expansion and growth in your life in many kinds of ways, whether it's children or creativity or travel or whatever that gives you a sense of inspiration. All of that is so much more positive than has been of late. Again, going back to the Saturn to end this, I think it's a positive thing, because it means that you don't get out of hand. Things you have to kind of stay within the lines. You know, if you take the analogy of traveling, for example, you can go and enjoy your travels, but you have some limitations or restrictions or lines on the road. You know, so this Saturn is very powerful in your third sign, which is also a good place to put Saturn for you to make some effort now and making things happen for yourself, Sagittarius. So I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Capricorn rising and or moon sign for April 2023, Capricorn, your ruler Saturn is now settled into Aquarius, your second house sign, and it has a strong influence on all that's going on in your fourth sign in the home, because there are so many planets moving into your fourth sign, with the sun moving in by mid-April, and by the end of April, Jupiter moving in, and we have an eclipse there, and we have a Mercury retrograde. So a lot of attention on your fourth house sign, Aries. And that's all about the home. That's all about your home, literally your house in home, but also about your sense of safety and security and your mother relationship. That's another big part of this. And so with so much attention on one place, oftentimes there's just too much, grappling for attention when planets can't really clearly individually express themselves without other planets, having their say. So it's just something to be mindful of in terms of maybe a lot going on in your home environment. Maybe there's a lot of people around, or you're having to deal with a lot of issues. And there are issues to deal with here because, of course, Mercury is in your fourth sign, Aries, and by Mars being in your sixth sign, Gemini, it means that they're exchanging signs, Aries and Gemini, fourth and sixth house signs. So this is all about you having to deal with some sort of issue in the home, and to overcome it, you might be challenged to overcome some issue. Definitely about getting out of your comfort zone for sure, this whole period, which can be a good thing. But again, it might present you with a challenge to overcome, some challenge to overcome there. So let me bring up, first of all, the eclipse that happens on the 20th. And mention here that even though it's a new moon in Aries, and that might sound like, oh, great, that's a new beginning. And it is in many ways. The sun moves in by mid-April, and the new moon then by the 20th of April. That is a new beginning in many, many ways. So there's a fresh start here in your home, essentially. So whatever changes that you're making in your home, this is a fresh new beginning. The only thing is that it's eclipsed. So by the 20th of April, the sun is a total lunar eclipse here. And the day after that, we have Mercury retrograde. And as well as that, Jupiter move into your fourth house. So a lot going on here, a lot to reconsider and review, a lot of change and unexpected change at that, because it's an eclipse. And so although it's a new beginning, I would say use this time to set some intentions about what you want to start anew here, but don't necessarily start it on the 20th. if you were to start something, I would do it on the 22nd. The 22nd is when the sun is exalted, the moon is exalted. And so these two, moon and sun, are our luminaries, our lights. On top of that, Venus is in its own sign, Taurus, in your fifth sign, a very nice transit. And Saturn is very powerful in your second sign, aspecting all these planets in your fourth home sign. So there's a lot of family dynamics and finances and home life and things to work out. But this would be a day to actually start something, or at least intend to start something, to put something on paper, or to do something on the 22nd of April. In Indian astrology, they call it Akshaya Tritiya, the undiminished third lunar day. So it's definitely a good time to start something. But again, taking into account that's an eclipse 2 days before. So we're starting into the eclipse now on April 20th. And then 2 weeks later, we have a lunar eclipse on May 5th, where you can then resolve many of these things that are cropping up here in April. So even though it's not auspicious in that way, and it's recommended not to start something new around the eclipse, we need to have something. We need something to start. And so this is the date in April, 22nd of April. But just keep an open mind about it, whatever you're starting, whether it's whatever is happening in your home life, in your personal life, and whatever you're resolving ultimately in a couple of weeks later, with the full moon and the lunar eclipse in Libra. There are lots of nice transits, like I said here, but just some complications as well with the exchange between the fourth and the sixth houses, and some things to work out. And I do think that the Saturn transit in your second sign related to finances and family is, in a way, not going to allow things to get out of hand, that you really won't be able to take any decisions that are ill-conceived or not thought through, because that's what Saturn's aspect does here on Aries, that you have to really think about the long-term implications. So that's actually a positive thing, I would say, Capricorn. So I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Aquarius rising and or moon sign for April 2023, Aquarius, Saturn continues through your sign. It's settled into your sign now, and that is very much a settling down phase in many ways, and a new beginning phase and a new building phase in your life in many other ways. And so that's much more positive overall, but that's for the long term. This is a 2-year transit until March of 2025. So there's a lot for you to build now, a platform for you to put in and make it secure so that you can move from there. So that's an overall transit, I would say. And that I do think is a positive thing ultimately. And its aspect onto your third sign in Aries, where all of the planets are gathering in April, where we have a new moon and solar eclipse, as well as Mercury retrograde and Jupiter move in here for the next year, with so much attention and focus on your third sign. The Saturn aspect in your first sign onto your third, I think is a very positive thing, because it will make you focus more, because otherwise there's just too much going on here in your third sign, and there still is a lot going on here. So I'll just show you, by mid-April the sun moves in, and then by the 21st of April Jupiter moves in. So this is, if I just bring it back to your sign here, Aquarius, Jupiter, Sun, Mercury's retrograde from the 21st, Uranus very closely conjunct, and the Rahu eclipsing the sun on the 20th of April. This is a lot of focus on your third house, which is about making effort and your confidence to express yourself clearly and to take up some initiative and to do something new. And because Mercury is here in Aries and Mars in Gemini, of self-expressive creative endeavors, which third house is very much to do with also, and they're exchanging therefore signs, this is a powerful time for you to take some initiative and to make some effort to express yourself through whatever means necessary, whether it's through some art form, whether it's through communications, written or otherwise. This is a great time to get really clear. Now, to get really clear suggests that you're not really clear, because there's an eclipse. So if I show you that here on the 20th, we have an eclipse at 5 degrees of Sidereal Aries. This is your third sign eclipse. It's a new moon and solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse in your third house of initiative. It sounds great, because it sounds like, oh, I should start something new on the 20th of April. However, it's an eclipse, a total solar eclipse. And so there's not a lot of clarity. It is a good time to set some intentions and to be clear, or to get clear, but there might not be that clarity from the get-go. And then the day after, on the 21st, Mercury goes retrograde. And as Jupiter moves into the sign, so transitions from one sign to another. So there's kind of a lack here for Mercury and Jupiter, in a sense, a lack of clarity, in other words, when we combine this with the eclipse. And yet still it's about getting clear, if you're not clear about getting clear. And if you were to start something, I would use this day, the 22nd of April, where the sun and moon are both exalted. Sun in Aries, moon in Taurus. Venus is also a very powerful position in the 4th house in Taurus. Very, very nice, sweet transit of Venus in Taurus for the month of April. And Saturn is in its own sign, in your sign, Aquarius. So there's a lot of strengths going on here. Even Mars, if you imagine Mars here in Aries, when it exchanges with Mercury, putting Mercury in Gemini, so many strengths going on here. Again, a great time for new beginnings in many ways. April 22nd more so, use the time, but just to be mindful of it being an eclipse now. And then also being Mercury retrograde, so that you're having to be really mindful of how you're communicating, whatever you're doing and whatever you're expressing in any format. There is a full moon and partial lunar eclipse a couple of weeks later on May 5th in your 9th sign. And that's when a lot of these things can be resolved. But in the meantime, you might feel a sense of urgency to get something done, or to express something, or to say something. So don't send off that email in a hurry, I would say. Don't sign on the dotted line just yet, if at all possible. And if putting it off would be preferable, if you can consider that. And also getting any advice, be really clear about the advice you're getting, and check in with yourself and your own gut instinct about anything at this time, I would say. But otherwise, like I said, it's a very powerful time, and a time to make the effort, to really put the effort in, and you'll get great rewards from it. So Aquarius, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Pisces rising and or moon sign for April 2023, Pisces, your ruler Jupiter is about to move out of your sign after the last year transiting through Pisces. And this is both good news and also a mixed bag. And the reason for that is that although Jupiter in Pisces is a very powerful position for you, and there is this sense of new hope, because it was hemmed in between Saturn and Rahu, it wasn't able to go anywhere. So that's good news, the fact that it's leaving that sort of constricted environment. I guess the mixed bag is that Jupiter then moving into your 2nd sign, if I show you here, is a mixed bag because, yes, it's moving into Aries, and it's all about taking the initiative and starting something new. And it is strong in Aries in many ways because it's friendly with the ruler Mars. It is also now aspected by Saturn in Aquarius in your 12th sign. So Saturn continues to have an aspect, an influence, an eye on Jupiter. Now, I do think that ultimately that's actually a good thing, because otherwise what's happening in here in Aries without Saturn could have easily got out of control. And so when you think about that, maybe thinking about your spending and how your expenditure really puts a lid on what you're doing here in the 2nd sign, whether it's some kind of financial situation or in your family or whatever it might be. Saturn, even just literally speech, like what you're saying right now, to be very clear about that and to really be mindful, just take a step back and be very objective, for example, with Saturn's influence on your 2nd sign, because otherwise there's just so much going on and so many planets gathered here in your 2nd sign in April, including the sun by mid-April. And then by the 21st, Jupiter. And we also then have an eclipse on the 20th. And then the day after, Mercury goes retrograde. So a lot going on here, and too much maybe, so that it's very hard to be clear about any one thing when there's so many things. So I'll show you here the eclipse. It's on the 20th. We have the sun and moon, of course, come together, 5 degrees of Aries. It's a total solar eclipse, eclipsed by Rahu, the north node. The day after, Mercury goes retrograde, closely conjunct Uranus, and then Jupiter moves in to Aries. So transitioning from one sign to another, there's a lack of clarity here more than anything around this new moon, even though, again, it's a new moon in Aries and it sounds like it's about taking some initiative. It's not the best day to actually start something on the 20th because of the eclipse, of course, and it's so therefore not auspicious. And then, of course, on top of that, Mercury retrograde. However, if you were needing to start something in April, the most auspicious time would, in fact, be 2 days later on April 22nd, when the sun is exalted and the moon is exalted. Both are exalted on the same day. On the 22nd, it's called Akshaya Tritiya, the undiminished lunar day, third lunar day, Tritiya. And so Venus is also in a very powerful position now in Taurus, a very nice place to put Taurus or Venus. And Saturn is in its own sign. Even Mars exchanging with Mercury is, if Mars were in Aries and Mercury were in Gemini, places so many planets in great strength at this time. So in that way, there are strengths for sure, but you just need to be open-minded. And, you know, it's not very clear right now, whatever it is you're starting. Finances, perhaps family dynamics, whatever it is, whatever you're speaking even, it's not very clear. And yet at the same time, there's great many insights and developments happening here. You just have to be really mindful of not being clear as you're working it out, especially then with Mercury retrograding until the middle of May. So from the end of April to the middle of May, while we work out all of the eclipses and all of that, you know, try and be really open-minded about what's happening and what's being presented right now. And especially around any kind of advice, I would say just be really open-minded about what advice you're getting and check in with yourself and your own gut instincts on anything. I'll talk more about Jupiter as it settles into Aries now for the following year, in fact, because, and by the way, Jupiter in the second sign, whether it's from your rising sign Pisces or moon sign Pisces, is a more positive placement actually than even the first sign. Jupiter does much better in the second sign because it's all about increasing wealth and abundance in that way. So that's actually more positive, but we need to kind of get through the eclipse first and then the Mercury retrograde and all of that. The exchange that's going on between Mercury retrograde now and Mars, this second, fourth house exchange, shows that there's a lot to work out in your home and family dynamics in April, May. And once all of this is worked out, then you can allow Jupiter to bring in the expansion and growth. Again, Saturn may be keeping a lid on it somewhat, but it also may be keeping it in check so that you're not overdoing anything, that you're not overspending, like I said, and that you can save more money at this time. So I think a lot more positive for you overall, Pisces, than even Pisces, Jupiter in Pisces was in the last year. And in many ways, this can bring a new sense of new beginnings for you. So I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time.